What happens when the fear of abandonment becomes so overwhelming that it rewrites the fundamental rules of human connection? In the mind of Jeffrey Dahmer, every relationship was already over before it began. Every person who entered his life was pre-programmed to leave. This wasn't paranoia in the traditional sense. It was a conviction born from a pattern that started in childhood. The sense that he existed behind glass, watching human warmth from a distance he could never cross. Most minds develop ways to bridge this distance. They learn the language of connection, imperfect as it may be. But some minds, rare and terrible in their solution, decide that if connection is impossible, possession might suffice. If people will inevitably leave, perhaps there's a way to make them stay. This is where Dahmer's psychology becomes both comprehensible and horrifying. The logic was perfect from inside. If consciousness couldn't be shared, it could be owned. If love was impossible, control could replace it. If abandonment was inevitable, he would remove the possibility of departure entirely. The apartment in Milwaukee wasn't just a living space. It was a universe operating under different laws, physical laws, moral laws, laws where preservation and destruction became the same act, where keeping someone meant ensuring they could never choose to leave. Think about how you keep things you value. Photographs in albums, letters in drawers, memories in the careful architecture of your mind. Now imagine that impulse applied to human beings. The desire to keep becoming so literal, so absolute, that the boundary between person and possession dissolves entirely. Dahmer didn't see people the way you do. By his late teens, other humans had become something else, potential solutions to an unbearable problem, walking remedies for a loneliness so profound it had become its own form of death. Each person he met was evaluated through this lens. Could this be the one who finally stays? The approach was always the same: calculated warmth, practiced normalcy. He had learned to mimic human connection the way others learn a foreign language, mechanically, without ever truly understanding the meaning behind the words. The smile was correct, the conversation appropriate, but underneath was an evaluation process as cold as mathematics. When he offered drinks to young men in bars, he wasn't sharing hospitality, he was testing a hypothesis. When he suggested they come back to his place, he wasn't seeking companionship in any way you'd recognize. He was implementing a solution he'd refined in fantasy for years before it became real. The drugging wasn't about incapacitation, it was about transition, moving someone from the unbearable category of person who can leave to the manageable category of presence that cannot refuse. In that transition, Dahmer believed he'd found the answer to an impossible equation: how to never be alone while being incapable of genuine connection. But here's what makes the psychology truly disturbing. He needed them conscious at first, needed the semblance of willingness. The fantasy required a moment, however brief, where it might have been real connection, where someone might have chosen to stay. Only when that illusion shattered, as it always did, would the final solution be implemented. The killing was never the point. Death was simply the doorway to a different kind of relationship, one where abandonment became impossible, where the other person's autonomy, that unbearable reminder of his own isolation, finally ceased to exist. In death, Dahmer found the only form of reliability he could trust. What followed was ritual, but not in any religious sense. These were personal ceremonies of possession, attempts to preserve not just bodies, but essences. The photographs weren't trophies, they were relationship artifacts, proof that someone had been there, had stayed, couldn't leave. The compartmentalization required to maintain this dual existence was extraordinary. By day, Dahmer worked at a chocolate factory, made small talk, performed the routines of normalcy with practiced precision. But it was all translation, all performance, like an actor who never leaves the stage even when the audience goes home. The real life happened in private, in the carefully controlled space where different definitions existed, where companionship meant something the outside world couldn't understand, where he could arrange and rearrange his collection, creating tableaus of connection that required only one conscious participant. Alcohol wasn't recreation, it was maintenance fluid. The thing that quieted the part of his mind that knew must have known that the solution wasn't working, that each attempt to fill the void only made it larger, that the loneliness wasn't ending but deepening with each person who couldn't leave. Because here's the paradox that destroyed him from inside. A connection that cannot refuse you is not a connection at all, it's an echo. And somewhere in the depths of his consciousness, Dahmer knew this. Each person he kept only proved the impossibility of what he sought. Each success was actually a failure, highlighting the unbridgeable distance between possession and genuine human connection. The escalation wasn't driven by sadism or increasing violence, it was desperation. The periods between became shorter because the emptiness returned faster. The rituals became more elaborate because simple possession wasn't enough. He began attempting to create what he called zombies, living but completely controlled beings. The perfect solution. Someone present but without the autonomy to leave. These experiments with drilling and acid weren't torture in his mind. They were attempts at perfection, trying to find the exact balance between existence and agency, between presence and will. He was trying to create the impossible, a conscious being without consciousness, a companion without independence. The 17 murders weren't 17 different events in his psychology. They were 17 attempts at the same solution. 17 failures that looked like successes. 17 proofs that what he sought was impossible, but 17 reasons to try again. Maybe this time, maybe with this person, maybe with this method. When police finally entered that apartment, what they found wasn't just evidence of crimes. They found a universe of alternative meaning, a place where every object had been repurposed to serve a philosophy of possession, where the refrigerator wasn't for food, but for keeping, where photographs weren't memories, but proof of presence. Even after arrest, Dahmer's psychology remained intact. The confusion wasn't about being caught, but about being misunderstood. He genuinely couldn't comprehend why others saw horror where he saw solution, why they called it murder when he called it preservation. The internal logic was so complete, so self-contained, that external reality couldn't penetrate it. In interviews, he would speak about his crimes with a flatness that disturbed even experienced investigators. Not because he was emotionless, but because he was translating, trying to explain a private language that had no equivalent in normal human experience. Using words like companionship and loneliness, but meaning something entirely different. The question that haunted him wasn't why he did it, but why it didn't work. Why the loneliness never ended. Why the solution that seemed so perfect in theory failed so completely in practice. He could possess bodies, but never the consciousness that animated them. Could create presence, but never connection. Could prevent leaving, but never inspire staying. This is the architecture of a mind that tried to solve an emotional problem with a physical solution, that confused possession with connection, that believed loneliness could be cured by making it impossible for others to leave, not understanding that true companionship requires the freedom to go. What makes Jeffrey Dahmer's psychology truly terrifying isn't its alien nature, but its twisted familiarity. The needs he felt for connection, for permanence, for someone who won't leave, these are universal human desires. What separated him from the rest of humanity wasn't the needs themselves, but the solution he developed. The philosophy that said if you cannot have love, you could have ownership. If you cannot inspire someone to stay, you can remove their ability to leave. In the end, sitting in prison, Dahmer seemed almost relieved. Not because he felt guilt in any conventional sense, but because the exhausting performance was over. The dual reality had collapsed into one. He no longer had to translate between worlds or maintain incompatible truths. The experiment had ended, having proven only one thing definitively: you cannot cure loneliness by making it impossible for others to leave. The mind that sought to solve isolation through possession had achieved only perfect solitude, surrounded by the memory of 17 people who couldn't leave but were never really there at all. A reminder that loneliness, taken to its most extreme conclusion, doesn't seek connection, it seeks control. And control, no matter how absolute, is just another form of being alone.